Hello. Our story begins on Naboo, following the battle that rocked the Trade Federation, dispersing their one vessel blockade and giving the people back their freedom. Newt Gunray was captured, the Jedi Council and Chancellor were on the way, and the young Queen had a planet to fix. Inside the palace, Obi-Wan and Anakin waited patiently for the arrival of the Council. Obi-Wan initially planned on meeting them when they arrived, but his heart sunk into his stomach before he could. He was holding on to Master Qui-Gon's lightsaber, preparing to give it over to Master Dooku, believing that he was on the way. Yaddle was the Jedi Obi-Wan contacted following his duel with the Sith assassin. She explained that she planned on getting Dooku to come with the Council. Obi-Wan hadn't ever spoken to his Grand Master, and now they were going to give him Qui-Gon's lightsaber. Dooku's apprentice was killed, and Qui-Gon's apprentice had to deliver the blade. Obi-Wan was usually charismatic, but even for this, he wasn't prepared, so he and Anakin were absent from the arrival ceremony. Despite Dooku never coming to the planet, Obi-Wan still had to face the Council, which was an even bigger burden for him to handle. Master Yoda and Padawan, now Knight, Obi-Wan Kenobi had much to discuss. Qui-Gon made Obi-Wan promise to look after Anakin, and he made the promise. The issue is, he didn't know if he could. Kenobi doubted himself too hard, and this was sensed by Master Yoda. Initially, he came here to allow it, despite the judgment of the Council. But without a teacher willing to train Anakin, and Obi-Wan emotionally unbalanced, Yoda rescinded his offer before it could ever be openly made. Anakin would need to find a different path, and Yoda told Obi-Wan that while his promise to Qui-Gon was admirable, it was important that they took into consideration the fate of this boy. If they wanted to take true care of Anakin, then perhaps Obi-Wan should see if the Queen's family would be willing to look after him. If they were, then Anakin, the emotional former slave boy from Tatooine with attachments, would be able to live a much more fulfilling life. Obi-Wan's heart sank further into his body, but even with the burden of not fulfilling his promise to Qui-Gon, there was a bit of relief. He could ease his mind, and Anakin could be with another. He did feel bad, but if this was the best option for Anakin, then it needed to be done. Obi-Wan, similar to how he was with Qui-Gon's lightsaber, felt the burden of weight on him again, and almost couldn't go through with it. Kenobi wasn't known for forfeiting his Jedi ways to emotion, but he was feeling pressure at the moment. He couldn't escape the same repeated sight of his master falling lifelessly to the ground. That was causing so much mental turmoil for the young Jedi. He wasn't thinking clearly because of it, and without a proper direction for himself, he did as the Grand Master of the Jedi Order asked him to do. He went to Padme, apologizing for having to trouble her with this, but informing her that the Jedi weren't bringing Anakin into the Order. He needed to find Anakin a place, and he was hoping that she'd be willing to take him in. The Queen was with her parents, and they whispered to their 14-year-old daughter, who nodded her head. What they were saying, Obi-Wan didn't know, but he did know that after bringing this question to the Queen, he realized that he may have again made a mistake. Maybe not for Anakin, but for himself, and for his promise to a dying master. Padme's mother and father stepped forward, telling Obi-Wan that they owed him and his Jedi Master eternal gratitude. Anakin also deserved a piece of such praise, and they expressed that they'd be willing to take the boy to their villa immediately. If he wanted to stay for the funeral, then he was more than welcome. But Sola, Padme's older sister, was back home. She would be someone that Anakin could lean on for emotional support. Obi-Wan's smile flickered up and down, between a true smile and a frown. He felt like this was a mistake, but it was the best thing for Anakin. Maybe he was simply trying to convince himself of that. Maybe he just was being truthful. Regardless, he thanked them for understanding. The Nabiri parents asked if they could meet the boy first, and Obi-Wan promised an introduction after he informed Anakin. They nodded and waited. Obi-Wan's struggles continued when he informed the boy of this predicament, and how he wouldn't be allowed into the Order. Obi-Wan did not allude to the lack of fight for Anakin's inclusion into the Order. All he said was he wished he could have done more, even though the opportunity to do so had already presented itself. Anakin was truthfully disappointed, but the fact that Obi-Wan had gone out of his way to make sure he had a home made him feel better. Skywalker asked the Jedi Knight about his mother, and Obi-Wan promised that he would try to do his best to get her off of Tatooine. This made their bittersweet moment bearable for Obi-Wan. Anakin felt like he got a good deal out of this, which in all fairness he had, but it was better than even he initially anticipated. Anakin would stay for the funeral, and once it was over, he and the Nabiris would return to the villa so Anakin could meet Sola and familiarize himself with the beautiful countryside. Anakin didn't know this much water existed in the whole galaxy. There it was though. He could see the beautiful lake and grass, and while there was sand, it was tolerable in the beauty of the Nightside Valley. On the more sinister side of things, Palpatine did not have a connection to Anakin. He had heard of a boy that was responsible for the destruction of the Trade Federation battleship, but the way Padme said it made it sound like it was one of the royal pilots, so chances are it was exactly that. A royal pilot who flew up into the vessel and destroyed it. No big deal for Palpatine. During the funeral, he could feel a powerful entity in the Force, and while he had been around the council before, he just chalked it up to the entire council being present. Most of the time when he worked with them, it was select members. During Valorum's term, it was a lot of Yoda and Aligalia, or Mace, Yoda and Mundi, or another bundle. It was never the full body. It just seemed like the natural conclusion to draw. Not to mention, between Palpatine and Anakin were Obi-Wan and Padme, so he wasn't even that close to him. The following day there'd be a huge celebration, but Anakin was not present for it. He instead was spending all day with Sola. Padme's older sister was likely the best person for Anakin to be around. She was going to help Anakin adjust to life here on Naboo, but she also wanted the young kid from Tatooine to have a choice in direction. Sola had taken up roles in her community, volunteering at local schools and education centers, so she was well familiarized with being around children. Sola and Anakin went out to the beach so Anakin could get a different feel of what sand was like, without the ickiness of a desert. It was a life-changing experience for Anakin, and he enjoyed spending all day with Sola. Her younger sister was on the other side of the planet, sharing in the great celebration of their victory over the Trade Federation. The true unity of Naboo was something that almost everyone was present for. Anakin was glad he was away from the loud noises. While he was excited by all the change, the previous day had been very heavy on him. At his age, he couldn't really define his emotions, but what he could define is what he wanted wasn't what he needed. Being around Sola was what he needed, so it was best that he was here. After the Chancellor and the Jedi left, after the celebrations ended, and after everything started to return to normal life after a trying time, Anakin was given a choice. He had, by this point, spent a full week with the Nabiris. Padme was given time to take a break. It was commonplace for queens to be plucked from their youngest generation. The belief was that children had the purest minds, therefore, right for leadership over the planet. But in the wake of such travesty, the council that Padme put up around her elected to send her to her home villa for a couple of days just to recuperate. She had been through a very difficult journey. Her valor and courage had saved her people. She deserved time with her family and time to relax. She reluctantly accepted, but she didn't spend time with her family. Most of her time at her family's home villa was working. She paced around the villa's porch and typed away on her tablet. Anakin wanted to be with or around her, but Sola discouraged him. She knew it was best to leave her little sister alone when she was doing that. Padme needed the kinetic energy of moving to get her brain pumping. She walked around and typed away, bringing up ideas for bills, directions for the Naboo government to go into, and potential ways to propose punishment for the Trade Federation. Since Palpatine was the Chancellor, it couldn't hurt trying to bring up motions within the Senate. As Padme was preparing for her return to work with more work, Anakin was hanging around with a new father figure, that being Rui Nabiri, Padme's father. He was kind, compassionate, and listening. Anakin was able to enjoy playing catch with him and enjoy just being a kid for the first time in his life. But this, at the end of the week, left Anakin with a decision. The Nabiris were an influential family, and obviously with Padme being the queen who just liberated the planet, they could really get away with almost anything. Anakin could grow up a normal kid on the countryside, enjoy the life of the Nabiris and go to school, or he could have a choice of returning to Theed and getting involved with the Naboo Handmaidens. It typically was a role reserved for young women, but if Anakin felt more comfortable being around Padme, they could make it work. The reason this was proposed was because Rui and Jabal could see how attached to Padme Anakin was. It wasn't like the family wasn't good to him, and it wasn't like he didn't appreciate them. He just had formed an attachment with her on Tatooine, and out of anyone from Tatooine left, it was her. He very quickly chose the Handmaiden path, hoping that it was alright with them, which it was. They supported him. Padme would return to the capital first. For Anakin, it would take about another month, but that was alright. They had to get him set up, which took a little bit more time than they hoped it would. But Anakin's acceptance into the Handmaiden program gave him hope to be close to Padme again. It was ironic though. Because he spent a month with the Nabiris, he got super attached to their family, so he almost regrets sending himself to Theed, but he believed it was the right decision to make. Padme's parents promised Anakin that they would try and find a way to free his mother. It'd be very difficult, but they promised him. It wouldn't be cheap to send a bunch of guards to the Outer Rim to free a slave, but they hoped that they could find some way to manage it. At least with Anakin around, he could guide them to the location of Watto, instead of having to rely on Padme to make room in her busy schedule to go to Tatooine herself. This would just make things a lot easier on all sides. Upon entering the Theed Palace, a young woman named Sabe would come to greet Anakin and bring him into their group. The training to become a handmaiden wasn't excruciating, but they were placed around the queen to be her guards. Being that Anakin was a male, the group had to come up with a different way to incorporate him into their group. But that wasn't of any concern at the moment. As the grouping did with all their new members, they inducted them into their group, getting them familiar with the facilities, their arrangements, ships, and habits of the handmaidens. It may have not been intense, but it was difficult. They worked hard to maintain structure and order, and despite it not being a paid position, everyone who got involved got some extra incentive as they transferred into other positions in life: universities, med school, law school, various protection agencies, and whatnot. It was described as the role to jumpstart an individual's life and career. Public service was very important to the handmaidens, and they quickly installed this into Anakin. The role was serious in nature, something Anakin hadn't been prepared for, but it wasn't serious like the Jedi. It was indescribable to him at this point, but the difference was warmth. Each of the young women who worked with the handmaidens were especially kind, and they weren't cold and cut off from their emotions. They were real people with real feelings, and they respected and acted upon such emotions as people should. Anakin was opened up to an entirely different viewpoint of the galaxy. Inside the temple, he would have been forced to conform to their ways. Here on Naboo, he was able to adjust to their lifestyle, but not just change himself fundamentally or in a way that would change his persona. The first few months with the handmaidens would be very similar to his first week with the Nabiris. Those who were beginning their training to become full-time handmaidens had weekends off, which meant they could go home or they could stay. Didn't affect their scores or their placements if they did either or. For candidates that were Anakin's age, they were more focused on the schooling aspect of their lives, which ironically would have been very similar to Anakin's time as a Jedi. All their time working together was productive, but it was happy. So while they were always doing things like studying or training or just observing, there was an element of freedom. That gave Anakin a chance to really feel included. He was able to see Padme, but she was frequently unavailable. The Trade Federation had left their people with a sick predicament, and Padme refused to let the Republic get the upper hand on her. They had wronged her people. She was not going to put herself in debt to the Republic, one who still hadn't convicted Newt Gunray of his crimes at Naboo. This decision did make her job more stressful, but it didn't impact the lives of her people in the slightest. For the next several years, Anakin's life would be influenced by those around him. He would be raised by both the handmaidens and the Nabiris. It was a very balanced life, and it left him fulfilled. Obi-Wan did come to visit a couple times, but he hadn't made progress on freeing Shmi. The Nabiris had, thanks to a push made by Padme. They were just waiting for credits to transfer, and 29 BBY, Shmi was freed and brought back to Naboo. And thanks to the generosity from his adopted family, Shmi was given a home. Despite making the Handmaiden Squad as a gentleman of the palace, he never saw Padme often. Anakin's role actually began a rise of new members to the Palace Division, opening up room for young men to become gentlemen in aids to the Handmaiden Squad. Anakin's role wasn't much different than the Handmaidens. The only difference was less danger because he couldn't be Padme. The reason he didn't see much of her was because his job was to move around the palace. Traditionally, this may have been seen as a servant, and this wasn't that. It was more of a protection of the Thebe Palace itself. It was a boring job, but Anakin found ways to be entertained. That, and of course, as a young man in 28 BBY, he was crushing on one of the handmaidens that joined the team when he joined. Her name was Ari Velt. They were often stationed around each other, so it made it easier for him to form an attachment to her. At this point, everything was going perfectly in Anakin's life. He was happy with where he was, and he was content with everything. Shmi was happily living out on the countryside, thanks to the kindness of the Nabiris. He told them that he wanted to give something back to them, but they didn't want or need anything from him. It was also in this year that the people of Naboo tried to amend the constitution to get Padme to remain as their queen, which she was very honored by. However, she believed that there were more important things for her to do, which was representing Naboo on a galactic level. She went out to Coruscant to represent her people within the Senate. She was in need of a representative to accompany her, and her first choice was Jar Jar Binks, who immediately joined her on Coruscant. Anakin was a little blindsided by this. He knew that Padme was destined for a role on Coruscant, and he had prepared himself adequately for it. Despite him still crushing on Ari, he still had a little thing going on for Padme. It was like a little love triangle in his mind. Didn't really exist, but it was something that added an extra flair to his life. Anakin caught a solid groove on Naboo. He was able to thrive within both environments he spent most of his time with. Inside the palace on Theed, and inside the family villa on Naboo's countryside, Anakin thrived. He was able to learn about the politics of the galaxy, which he initially hated but fell in love with. he was able to continue his mechanical work, even building a small speeder that he used to strand himself on an island in the middle of the river valley. Ruby eventually had to come out and get him, but it was a good laugh, a story that was told at annual family gatherings. Anakin's mechanical work never went to waste, and he was able to thrive on Naboo with his new family. Not being chosen for the role of representative didn't ruin his life, and he continued to proudly serve inside the palace with the new queen, Rylata, for the next 2 years. Serving inside the palace as a gentleman alongside the Handmaidens was actually a blessing in disguise. He was able to watch from a distance as the Trade Federation tried painting Padme as a foolish kid. Her early friendship with Bail Organa of Alderaan helped put such rumors to sleep. Jar Jar didn't exactly help her case publicly though. Regardless of that, Anakin and Ari spent a lot more time together with Padme off-world. She and he hadn't admitted their feelings for each other, but they sprouted even more without another individual interrupting Anakin's attention. He just couldn't figure out what his heart desired anymore. As it turned out, he wanted a little bit of both. He longed to become a representative, and he cared for Ari more than Padme, which was fine. So much of his time around Padme and the family kind of turned him into a sibling in the eyes of the parents, and even kind of Sola, so it would have made things weird even for Anakin. Anakin's upper-class upbringing in the latter half of his childhood pushed his motivations forward. The only reason Anakin became invested in the role of representative was to make a greater change for the galaxy on the galactic level, something he wouldn't be able to do sporting the angelic colors of the gentleman's attire. Skywalker and Velt studied for the following 2 years. Ari, again, without admitting her feelings for Anakin, became invested in his ascension to the role of representative. She believed in him. She, on the other hand, thanks to being with the Handmaidens, was preparing to go into university at Naboo, to learn more about public relations and eventually hopefully become an outer-world doctor, an individual that worked as a medic but traveled to more disturbed locations. Ari wanted to help people on a personal level, and this was the way to do it. If Anakin could help the Republic see the light, or in all actuality the darkness of the Outer Rim, she might be able to go and make a difference on a much more personal scale. In 26 BBY, at the election of Queen Jamilia, Representative Jar Jar Binks was replaced by Anakin Skywalker. This was not because Jar Jar was bad. He had just worn his welcome with some of the senators and representatives inside the Senate. They were growing weary of his vibrant personality. He wasn't for everyone, and the Queen accepted that, so she put him into another role he would thrive in. Queen Jamilia also wanted to see Padme have more success, and Anakin would complement that well. With Ari going to university and a profession of love never coming from either or, the two of them were separated for who knows how long. It left a cavern entrenched in both their hearts. If they would be filled again, neither knew. But it gave Anakin a reason to believe he should have told her how he felt before they separated. On Coruscant, as a representative of the planet of Naboo, Anakin joined Padme once again. Something was clearly different about her. The stresses of being in the public eye on Coruscant were eating away at her. But more than that, she had enemies lurking around every corner, all of which looking for their chance to destroy her reputation and end her life. Anakin, by the time he arrived, was more than familiar with the Nabiri stance on the Republic, as well as Padme's. Despite he and she not seeing each other a whole lot, Anakin was able to learn through observation. Padme's stances were in complete contrast to Palpatine's, which was ironic being that they were for the same planet. Even more ironic than that, Palpatine had mentored Padme in a multitude of ways before her ascension into the Senate. Now with Anakin here, he was able to truly grasp the roles of each player and how they play the game called Galactic Senate. Maybe it wasn't the best way to view it, but the Senate was a giant game. Kill or be killed, and Anakin loved the thrill of it. So much of his young adult life had been influenced by nurturing. An initial distaste for politics relished in the possibilities of it, with a kind family who taught him their views and helped him understand where Naboo and Tatooine stood on the scale, and how despite Palpatine being a better choice than Valorum, that comparatively wasn't the greatest step up. Valorum was such a low bar, an individual influenced by the bureaucrats, and now he was Palpatine, a man who upheld the status quo. He was popular, but that was why. Nothing bad happened under his watch, but no positive change was made either. His term as Chancellor could be best described as complacency in the eyes of the Nibiris. Anakin came in with a head full of steam, but as a representative there wasn't much he could really do. Representatives in the core were selected to voice a minority population or political group from their home world. Padme's position was overseeing an entire world, or sector, in this case Naboo, and Anakin's role was to be representative of the Royal House of Naboo and the Gungan High Council. It was a joint operation, and maybe too much for a junior representative to look over. but he was confident in his abilities. At 16, he was like a sponge, taking in information rapidly. Because he hadn't met the Chancellor by this point in his life, all of his influence came from those who truly had a slight disregard for Palpatine. No one disliked him, but they did feel betrayed when he became a true head of state and forgot about Naboo. This wasn't a lack of understanding of the role of Chancellor. This was his decision to neglect things that the people of Naboo wanted, which was justice for the blockade that had happened nearly 6 years beforehand. The Queen, the Gungan Council, and the people were all in agreement that Nute Gunray should be in prison, but for whatever reason, he continued to avoid the call to be placed in Orange and sent to a maximum security prison. Truth be told, Gunray was still calling the shots for the Trade Federation, which is why Padme and now Anakin's job had become more increasingly difficult to manage. But Skywalker, as representative, continued to be the eyes and ears of Padme, which was much easier to instruct Anakin to do. Jar Jar was great, but he and Anakin thrived at different aspects of their roles. For Anakin, he was able to thrive in the secrecy of hearing the conversations of the business conglomerates with a stake in Republic politics. Due to his upbringing, he began to see each of these corporate guilds as part of the problem with the Republic. The body of government was still choosing credits actively over its people, and that was directly affecting the status of the galaxy. People were suffering, and the government wasn't doing anything about it. This was a bipartisan choice for more credits over simple care. Anakin and Padme had become aware of the tensions growing in the outer and mid-rims. People were getting tired, and a former Jedi was incentivizing these individuals to take a stance against the Republic. They were nothing more than rumors, but they still left a mark. Skywalker was running around like a Rathtar with its head cut off. He was going from meeting to meeting and addressing small councils and delegations, proposing actions or movements from senators. His day job was high stress, extreme activity, and non-stop movement. But the thing is, Anakin adored him. Thanks to Rui, he found comfort in the action of the political battleground, and what he called his father taught him how to combine his interests. This was something Anakin was able to take into his life as a gentleman of the palace. He would look after something, but he always found a way to fidget, and that brought him into the comfort he desired. There was always little puzzles that could be done, things that anyone could do, and kept his mechanical mind churning, while allowing him to put himself out as a politician. After a couple months and pushback from his constituents, Anakin approached Padme's caucus, suggesting that they try to remove the Trade Federation from power inside the Senate. If not that, then they should try to do it with several businesses with a long-standing power in the Senate. The caucus liked this, but they couldn't really do it legitimately. For over a century, the Republic had been controlled by businesses and representatives. So much of this was done under Senator Rayencourt nearly a century beforehand, so they couldn't do anything to undo such long-standing power structures in the government. What the senators and representatives did not know was that Senator Rayencourt was a Sith plant, all a part of the larger Sith plan, one meant to oust the Jedi from power and prop up more business-ran empires. Obviously, this was all in the works long before Sidious was born. Regardless, Padme didn't believe it would be feasible. They would need 2/3 Senate majority, and the Chancellor wouldn't ever back it. Anakin knew Palpatine wouldn't, and that wasn't the point. If they could make a case to the people of the galaxy to show that the status quo upheld by Palpatine was wrong, then they could enact a series of change in the upcoming election. It was a risky operation, but it could legitimately work. Padme liked this idea, but it couldn't come from her. The biases she and her allies had against the corporate regime wouldn't garner attention in the Senate. Even a powerhouse like Alderanian Senator Bail Organa wouldn't be able to get a foothold with a motion like this. It had to come from someone with respect and power, so she suggested an old friend. Padme and Mina Bonteri were very close friends, with differing opinions. She believed that it would be a tough bargain to sell, but if he could effectively get Mina on their side, it could raise support. Anakin asked why they should go with Mina. If he wasn't mistaken, her world was one of the planets up for consideration in the potential rise of Confederacy or Separatist movements. That is true. Mina's name had been passed around as a rumor for another rumor, but she was a trustworthy face. Anakin would need to go to her and see if she would propose a removal for the Trade Federation. When Anakin reached Onderon with his Senate guard, he entered the palace of the extravagant senator. Mina was kind and warm. She welcomed Anakin in with open arms, and told him about their status. The Trade Federation was reaching too far out into the galaxy. It was a monopolizing power, one with remarkable strength, and it was being ignored by the Senate. She and her allies had prepared for their own counter, believing that a separatist movement would allow them freedom from the corporate mind. The issue is, many within the Senate believed that Lot Dodd was correct. Newt Gunray was referred to as a rogue extremist, one whose stance did not represent that of the Trade Federation. As of late, it had become abundantly clear that the Federation either had no stance or true backbone, or the Federation itself was aligned with such a rogue element. The truth remained though, Newt Gunray was still sitting idly in the courts, not getting thrown into prison for a crime that should have sent him away for life. Something more was going on here, and the Republic needed to act. Anakin believed that Gunray wouldn't face trial unless the Trade Federation itself faced it. Mina believed that he was right though. She told Anakin to remain with her, and she would allow him to make a case before all of her allies, constituents, and caucus. If they believed he was right, then they would forward a motion, of course only on the promise that Padme's delegation would support this movement in the Senate. It was the only way that it would get any support with her allies. While they waited for the upcoming talks, Anakin and Mina spoke about the powers of the banking clans, Commerce Guild, and Techno Union. All of these business conglomerates monopolized the galaxy, and if they were allowed to continue expanding, they would swallow up every single local and worldly business, outdoing them with production costs and output. If their entire system could be controlled by a couple rich business heads, then the entire system itself was at risk. Mina noted how insightful Anakin was. She had heard about him before, from Padme during one of their many talks, but Mina, as an elder politician, was very impressed. The young representative had a bright future ahead of him in politics, if he wished to follow it. When the time came for their meeting to begin, Anakin spoke eloquently and delivered a resounding speech, one he prepared with the help of Padme and Bail over a hologram during a recess on the Galactic Senate. Many of Mina's constituents and allies knew that Anakin was close to Padme, and the delegation she was pushing, but this could be mutually valuable on both sides. They could all profit off the Trade Federation's revoked representation, not only them but the other businesses with representation inside the Senate. For example, if they could get their hands on their own banking companies, the entire system could shift into a more localized economy, not one reliant entirely on the Muns, which realistically could put too much pressure on the system. It was bad enough that Hago Damas II vanished from thin air. He was wealthy and his influence was broad. He just disappeared, and it destabilized trust in the Muns. If one man's death or escape from the public eye could put so much pressure on a system, then it was flawed. Because while Damask had been removed from the public eye for about 20 years before his death, his funds were vast, and even though so many were focused on Palpatine's election victory, those who were aligned with Mina were more focused on the financial side of the vote of no confidence, and of course, the sudden death or disappearance of the banker. They did as they agreed to. By the time Anakin returned to Coruscant, a motion had been forwarded by one of Mina's allies, and the Trade Federation was under fire from all sides. The fact that the Trade Federation didn't have a rebuttal for why Gunray wasn't in prison added more fuel to the fire. The Senate rallied around a vote to remove the Federation, when calls from Mina's party suggested breaking of the monopolies of the Commerce Guild, Trade Federation, Techno Unions, and banking clans began. This call completely shifted the argument. It allowed Palpatine to gain support to stop the removal of the Federation. The added regulation on these monopolies was completely different as a scenario though. This initially seemed like a chance to get the Trade Federation out of the Senate, and just as it was about to go forward, it was put on the back burner. But despite how negative this looked, it secretly became extremely positive. The motion started by Padme, passed to Anakin, and then alley-oop to Mina Bontiri, was the perfect show of democracy at work. There were so many rumors that turned out to be true that the Republic was splitting up as a system, or preparing to abandon the Republic for another direction. This right here just proved to the Republic and those willing to move into a separatist movement that they could make a difference. To make matters more complicated, the Federation decided to put out ads on the local news coverage to make Mina, Padme, and their caucuses look bad. This instead brought attention to the actual governing side of things, and it made the Federation look worse in the eyes of the public. People saw these big businesses as what they were, and so they started to mount up and boycott each of these monopolies. In the mid, inner, and outer rims, this wasn't the biggest deal. But when Coruscant buyers and spenders started to boycott products from each of these companies, a real shift began. It wasn't overnight per se, but it completely shifted the status quo. Local business, not just on Coruscant but all across the core, started to skyrocket. Billions of people started to see these greedy corporations as what they were. The biggest monopoly affected by this was the banking clan. So many people had personal funds in the banking clans, and when they started to pull money from their personal accounts, the clans had to throw money back out. They tried to illegally put a hold on people's money, which dropped the price of their galactic stock. Investors, buyers, spenders, and personal accounts all got cold feet immediately because of this. With the corporate monopolies facing public scandals outside the Senate, they were forced to try and change their strategy, but it was already too late. Journalists and investigators started to show off the malpractice of these corporations, exposing what they really were on the daily. The best part about a galactic system is that millions of small businesses were around, and they were all ready to pounce. While they could jump in, they couldn't have the supply necessary to keep up with demand, which started to offset economic interest in the galaxy. Palpatine was forced to choose a side, screw over the voters and choose monopolies, or support the corporations that would side with Dooku in the war. On the Republic side of things, Palpatine was trying to maintain the status quo. On the Sith side of things, he was panicking, telling Dooku to come in and do damage control, but that didn't exactly work either. The Republic wasn't really interested in allowing pretentious former Jedi, royal families, get involved in the political rout of these corporate demagogues. To continue this persistence on Palpatine and the corporations, Anakin was sent with Sheltay Ratak, the head of Bail Organa's team, to Mandalore. Anakin and Sheltay were informed that the new Mandalorian society helmed by Duchess Satine was a free trade system, a super influential one at that. While Satine would never join the Senate, she would likely support their movement and suggest that more free trade be allowed. This could undermine the power of the corporate conglomerates. It was a bit risky, but if they could garner allies from outside the Republic, those who were affected by Republic decision-making in the Senate, then they could have a win on their hands. As Anakin and Sheltay were in hyperspace, they prepared everything they needed. It was during this trip to Mandalore where Anakin finally reigned in his confidence and reached a level of stardom as a politician. He had a way with his words, and with the assistance of his new friend, Sheltay, they were able to convince the Duchess to come to Coruscant with them. Also, in addition to Satine, she was gathering up a conglomerate of allies who had been affected by the Trade Federation, bringing in people whose lives were drastically changed by the monopolization of these conglomerates could change the position of some of the on-the-fence voters. Instead of returning to Coruscant, Anakin returned to Naboo, to be there for Ari as she prepared to progress into the doctorate's program at the university. They had been in soft communication, but there was worry from both sides that they had lost their feelings for each other, their unspoken ones at that. When they met up again, it was a little awkward at first, but immediately they got back into the swing of things. They caught up and everything went perfectly for the two of them. It was also a nice break for the both of them. Her studies and his Senate time were both arduous and stressful, so not having to deal with that and just being around each other on Naboo was just perfect. They stayed out in the countryside at Anakin's family villa, his actual family now. Inside the Senate, more carnage was happening. The businesses united. Dooku from Serena was brought in to support their cause. Satine was brought in to support the free trade of smaller businesses and regulations on monopolies. It was an insane back and forth. As a result, the Jedi were crawling all over the Senate building. It was a time of high stress, and due to near assassinations on those who opposed the Trade Federation, the Jedi decided to get involved. The Council did not confront Palpatine about this. They just went in to keep up security. It may have made a bad impression on the public, but these hearings were especially important for the Republic going forward. Palpatine wasn't pleased at all with the sudden ramping up of security, and so he made an effort to make sure the Jedi stayed unaware of what it was he was doing. The Trade Federation was especially interested in Palpatine keeping them within the Senate, and truthfully, Palpatine himself, not the Sith iteration, had to be present for that meeting. He couldn't breach his facade with these businesses, or they would use it for their own power in the Senate. Palpatine needed to show assurance to them before they panicked and made the situation worse. He needed to calm them down and promise them safety. He was mostly concerned because he was getting calls for resignation from the public. The status quo had been ruptured, and he needed to make sure the businesses of the Republic didn't turn everything on his head and make it worse. In an illegal move, he quietly requested these individuals to his mansion. They were not to be seen, and they were not to be transported over in regular vessels from the respective entities. They were ferried into the Chancellor's mansion for a midnight meeting where Palpatine addressed everything. The Jedi were not aware. Despite sensing foul play, they were not personally going to spy on the Chancellor. They were simply making sure protective measures were put into place, even if it were overdone in some scenarios. Palpatine's meeting with the conglomerate heads would have seen him as a true ally, and reassuring them to not go any further with this. They were good in his hands. Palpatine had a plan to expose weaknesses from Mina's side of the argument, weaknesses that could get her to resign from office. Padme, on the other hand, could be silenced, in his mind with his own influence. They were both from Naboo, surely he could get her to back off. And Satine wasn't even from the Republic. He would tell her to go away. No one wanted her kind here. This notion from Palpatine completely neglected how Dooku was pretty much the same thing. just in support of their caucus. Ironic, isn't it? There were some other plans, but Palpatine spoke about going into almost unethical lines. Making sure they had victory was all that mattered to him. The following morning, moments before the final Senate spectacle surrounding this hearing began, Palpatine was seated in his office under the Senate chambers. Representative Skywalker was returning to aid Padme, and the Senate had even more players playing. The Chancellor was preparing everything and readied himself to make history. He would maintain the control of the monopolies in the Senate, while ensuring he had the power to remain at the front of the Republic until the war came. When he ascended into the chambers, he saw a pod of Jedi waiting. Masters Yoda, Windu, Balaba, and Plo were stood like a bunch of gangsters, with a couple temple guards behind them. Why were they here? Surely their Jedi protection had gone too far this time. Dooku watched quietly from another pod with some of his allies as everyone wondered why the Jedi were here. They made an unannounced entrance. A couple temple guards ignited their staves and they moved over to Palpatine's pod and had him removed, along with his two aides. Mace took the stand, getting into the Chancellor's pod and apologizing to the Senate for this. But there was a true tragedy that had unfolded. He played a clip, one revealing every piece of information from Palpatine's talk with the Trade Federation, Commerce Guild, Techno Union, and banking clans from the previous night. They listened for several minutes as he continued to elaborate on a plan that would get them their power and help him maintain his head of state positioning. Master Windu, once it was over, waited for the outrage to cease. He acknowledged something not a soul in the Senate was concerned about. He told them that this was not a Jedi recording, nor was it Jedi intent. They had established higher security due to the assassination threats. A Senate guard, who was stationed to protect the Chancellor, overheard this. Mace didn't say this, but Palpatine was unaware of the heightened security. It was a miscommunication between the Council and Palpatine. Adi Gallia got the message to Masameda, who tried to get to Palpatine, but it was too late. The Chancellor never saw Moss's message because he was dealing with the meeting, and he hadn't checked them because of it. Moss didn't know that, and so he assumed it wasn't a big deal because it was just protection. Even more ironic, the person who recorded it and reported it to the Jedi wasn't doing it from the goodness of his heart. He wanted to be representative. His tenure as a captain of the Senate Guard was coming to a close, and this was his ticket to a lavish lifestyle in the Senate. He bought this ticket and he wanted in. Palpatine was just a stepping stone to get into it. Palpatine was arrested, and the Senate rallied together to not just revoke his power, but remove the corporations from their place in the Senate. Not just that, but it was decided that their influence was too great, so regulations were slapped against them. Palpatine attempted to go quietly and then he changed his mind, going into an escape by killing 4 temple guards with him before being killed by Yoda, Windu, Depa, and Plo. Anakin would learn a lot more about the Republic through this process, and how the democracy wasn't just a figment of their imagination or some words written in the law, but a conscious decision. It was through these events that he dedicated his life to it. But it wasn't the only dedication he committed to. When on Naboo, before coming back early after being called to come back, he and Ari admitted their feelings for each other. It was the best way to continue forward. Both were extremely smart, and even though they would be separated until she finished her doctorate, they would make it work. Dooku's ties to the Sith would die with Palpatine, and he would look for another way to achieve peace. But as he prepared to activate an army 4 years after Palpatine's death, he realized that the change he had longed for had already happened. Right before his eyes. He released his attachment to the Sith and made amends with his master, telling him the truth of what had happened and giving Yoda the burden of the clone army. There were still some untreated traumas that needed to be worked on between master and apprentice, but this was the correct path. Yoda would be able to address the clone army humanely and the rest would go smoothly. In the years that followed, Padme would move into the role of Chancellor, as the now 25-year-old Anakin Skywalker became the Senator of Naboo. He, with his wife Ari, lived a happy life. Despite having no children at this point, they had plenty of time to get there. Ari was working out in the field, thanks to Republic legislation to push for more change. It was actually through Anakin that Mandalore joined the Republic, offering up its own senator in the form of Corky Kryze, Satine's nephew and totally not Obi-Wan's son. These new policies reflected a government that stopped bending to corporate greed. By this point, those who had worked with the Federation or the other conglomerates were out of the job. Gunray was in prison for life, and the corporations were all out of business. Nature was healing. The government was doing its job, serving its people. And for a married couple who came together from across the stars, it was the perfect life, of enjoying theirs and making the lives of others better. And that, my friends, is our wholesome PP story Again, special thanks to our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Gert36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granny Debane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cully Rooney, Chuck Midori, RG38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weebus 670, Anakin Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, John Nguyen, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Galaxy 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Forwardly Say Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, Me 3 First Names, Darksaint46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button, it's more of that is. Check out PPC, Twitch, and something else, I don't know. Anyways, let's talk about this story. Before I really get into the talk, I have a theory, a gamer theory, about Senator Rancor from Acolyte. I believe that he was working with the Sith, something that would probably be explored in Season 2, and so that's why I brought him into the story, the idea that he probably could be like an influence for all the corporations, like the Trade Federation, getting into the Senate and trying to get the Jedi out. Okay, let's go to the other part of the story. I like the idea of balancing the Handmaidens with Padme's family. It's kind of like two what ifs in one, and that's kind of really why I think Anakin would become so focused in his role as a representative. I really feel like the Handmaidens can be viewed as an internship, and so I kind of wanted it to come off that way. It's an internship that kind of gets you into the next level of life, but it's like this upper class one because you're working in the palace, you're around the queen, you're doing special things to be special. Much like how in the Anakin Senator of Tatooine video, this story is about Anakin's political life growing in a different way, I wanted it to be reflected here. I also really like the idea of not just pursuing the role of Chancellor to make him super cool guy. I think having him have such a really strong role that affects change is much more impactful than being like, haha, super cool guy. I mean, I'm not saying that he couldn't become Chancellor in either of these videos in the long term, but I like the idea that it ends off on a high note with him kind of reaching the pinnacle of his career in that specific point where he's worked his entire life to become senator, and he becomes senator, or he's worked his entire life to become a representative, and then he becomes a senator. Or he's worked his entire life as a representative and does something incredible with it, and then becomes a senator after getting Mandalore of all planets to join the Republic. So I hope you all enjoyed this kind of political story, but also pretty wholesome in my opinion. If you all enjoyed, you know the deal. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.